So Oregon might not be done in the transfer portal. According to Justin Hopkins of Scoop Duck, Oregon is among the favorites to land Emmanuel Pregnon, transfer from USC, on the interior of the offensive line. Now, they also had a transfer out, who I'll talk about, Michael Gardner, because I had a couple of thoughts there. But Pregnon is not a name I expected to have pop up on Oregon's radar here. The interior of the offensive line is losing a couple of guys, but it kind of looked like there were other options available. So when I first thought, wait, going after Pregnon, they've got their two tackles in Harkey and World. They'll probably be backed up by guys like maybe George Silva if he decides to come back, or Janoris Wilson, who was the jumbo tackle this year. That would make a whole heck of a lot of sense. But on the interior, boy, it kind of seemed like there were a lot of options there. Matthew Bedford has, from what I have been told, getting a medical red shirt and coming back for a seventh season of college football. Maybe this means that isn't going to work out and Bedford's career is done. That would kind of stink because he was supposed to be eligible this year, but he got hurt and he hardly played, and I don't believe he hit the minimum threshold of playing in 5 games to burn a red shirt in that situation. So he should be back. But yeah, you lose Marcus Harper and you lose Nishad Strother, and those are guys who were among Oregon's best guards this year. But Kavika Rogers played, Davey Uli played. They have other interior offensive linemen waiting in the wings, but if you're getting Bedford, who you didn't really have from last year, kind of thought, it might be okay, but Oregon could feel differently. So Pregnon is a guy that started at Wyoming in the past and was at USC this past year. Would not be someone who I think they would bring in to be a depth piece along the offensive line, but we've also thought that before. Junior Angilau came over from Texas, and there was an injury factor that came into play here as well, but he never found his footing at Oregon. He never saw the field in a meaningful way, but he was an experienced player from his time at Texas, and kind of looked like once he got healthy, he just eventually got beat out, because Nishad Strother was someone who got hurt, but eventually worked his way up the depth chart, and Strother, I think, was Oregon's best guard this year. I thought Strother was really good. You know, Oregon ran, I think, most successfully behind the left side of that offensive line, because you had Connerly, who was just a road paver and might be a first-round pick in the NFL. And then you had Strother, who just made a habit out of taking a defensive lineman and not necessarily moving him down the field, but he just kind of turned him. He just turned him around, and that would create a lane. Oregon did that a lot this year. So I thought Strother was good, but adding another veteran to the offensive line up front, I could see working out. I could see why they would go in that direction, but this is a guy who figures to go somewhere and start. And if he were to transfer to Oregon, maybe Davey Uli is your 6th offensive lineman again. And if that were the case, hey, that's not the worst thing in the world. Because Uli, I thought, was quite good when he played for Oregon this season. And if he's, starting caliber, but not asked to start for a full season, he's also dealt with injuries in his career. That could make a lot of sense. But that's what I came back to after my initial reaction. Wait, really? They are? Like, oh, okay. But then I thought about it, and look at the way that position played out. Going into this season, in August, I talked about the offensive line and predicted it left to right to be Connerly, Harper, Poncho, Bedford, Cornelius. That combination never materialized. And you had points in the season where both guards went down. So this would be Lanning, I think, kind of covering, and Alik Terry as well, the offensive line coach, who's a stud, covering their bases as having a backup plan that includes a veteran somewhere, somehow. If your top 3 guards were Pregnon and Bedford and Uli, all 3 of those guys have veteran playing experience, some more than others, but if one guy goes down, or maybe they like the rotation of guards that they had at the end of last season, you can know that whoever you're putting in is going to have seen the field in a significant and meaningful way over the course of multiple years in college football. So that's how I think it could make sense. Now, on the flip side, Oregon had another transfer portal departure, and that's Michael Gardner. So I was under the impression that Oregon wasn't going to have any more transfers out because we're more than 5 days past the season, but maybe the paperwork just took a while to file. I don't know. I didn't mean to rhyme those words together. I apologize if it sounded corny because I heard it too. But Mykel Gardner was one of the defensive linemen that Oregon recruited in the class of 2023. They had 10 defensive linemen in total in that class, several of whom, but not all of whom, are currently impact players. Amari Washington is going to be a starter next year. Tuioti and Mateo have been impact guys for the last couple of seasons, and Blake Purchase is probably going to be a more impactful player next year than he was this season when he redshirted, which is not a traditional path towards, playing out your career where you play a lot as a true freshman, you redshirt the next year and don't play a whole heck of a lot, and then go back into the rotation. But hey, all right, cool. So those guys have been the most impactful of the group so far, and Gardner joins Johnny Bowens as the guys to transfer out from that particular class. But I like Oregon along the defensive line. And Gardner is someone who I certainly saw the upside, and like everybody else who, played or who was a blue chip prospect along the defensive line, your film coming out of high school tends to look pretty darn impressive. And Gardner was someone who I could have seen playing on the interior, but I think with the addition of Bear Alexander, that kind of crystallized for him, this is not the place where I'm going to see the field the most anyway. And we'll see where, he ends up. And I am curious all the time when guys transfer away because they aren't going to play at Oregon, where they end up going. I mean, for those who don't know, by the way, in a crazy turn of events, but not unsurprising after the Gasparilla Bowl, Ty Thompson is staying at Tulane and he's going to play tight end. Now, what I was told is that he could have gone to the FCS level, perhaps play quarterback, but wanted to stay at the FBS ranks. He's going to switch to play tight end. He's just not a quarterback. And let that be a lesson in how to view recruits. They are potential. And just because a kid doesn't get developed doesn't mean your coaching staff isn't any good. Or just because he doesn't hit that full potential doesn't mean your coaching staff isn't any good. But just because you recruit someone and he's highly rated, that does not mean... Now, Gardner wasn't the highest rated of the bunch. He was actually one of the lower rated defensive linemen in the group. But just because a kid has that ability doesn't mean it's automatically going to translate. So I think Gardner looked ahead and saw Bear Alexander coming in, Aiden Breland, who got into the Rose Bowl against Ohio State. Terrence Green, I think, has seen more snaps than he has in garbage time situations, which is how we got an indicator a season ago that Amari Washington would be a player on this year's defensive line. I think there are just more names than he was comfortable trying to battle out. And this is a great way to go about it if you're Oregon. Bring in the most talent that you possibly can. Let the cream rise to the top. Who cares what the rankings are? Tuioti wasn't the highest rated guy, but I think we can all agree he deserves to be on the field as often as he is. So maybe a transfer on one side, a transfer out on the other. I like where Oregon is at trenches-wise next year. Nothing's crystallized. Nothing is final. There's still a lot of moves that can be made. But right now, I think Oregon is in a good spot on both the offensive and defensive lines.